we on? Are we there? All right, we're doing the short version. If we are live, I'd like to say hailing frequencies open and welcome to a special live edition of Enterprising Individuals, the Star Trek discussion podcast that boldly goes into excruciating detail about the series, characters, and stories of the Star Trek universe. We are thrilled to be participating this year in the Captain Picard Week on YouTube, brought to you by Strange New Pod. And after this show today, please go check out all of the other episodes from this year's event and check out Strange New Pod at Strange New Pod on Twitter or your listening platform of choice. I'm your host, Aaron Coker, aka Caliban, and Captain Picard, more like Captain Discard. I'm joined in this episode by Joe Mazel. Joe is a writer, producer, and professional nerd, and he's one of the hosts of ABCD TOS, the only podcast that goes alphabetically through all episodes of Star Trek: Not the Next Generation. No, Star Trek, the original series. I've got Next Generation on the brain. From All Our Yesterdays to Wolf in the Fold, he's also one of the hosts of ABC Devo, the only podcast that goes alphabetically through the songs of Devo. And he's a lifelong film and comics fan. Joe, welcome back to Enterprising Individuals.
Well, I thank you for having me, Aaron. And I have to say, said it before, and I'll say it again, you do the introduction to my show far better than I've ever done it, and
please.
I might have to put you on staff.
Well, I've got affordable rates, so
all right,
have your people call my people, and we'll get it worked out.
We'll set up a lunch.
It's good to have you back aboard on the show.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
And today, in observance of Captain Picard Week, we'll be talking about the life of Picard, but from an unorthodox perspective, specifically the absence of his effects on the galaxy. Throughout his career in Starfleet as a captain and as an admiral, Jean-Luc Picard has had a nearly incalculable effect on the lives of the people in the Milky Way, from negotiating for peace amongst the races of the Federation, to stopping the Borg from rewriting history, to literally saving the life of the galaxy in his final test with Q. It's safe to say that no one in the 24th century has had as much effect on the galaxy as Captain Picard. And his courage in the face of danger, his adherence to his principles, and his sense of justice have saved us all at one time or another. But what if he wasn't there to be in the gap? And that's what we'll ask in just a few minutes. But first, I'm glad to have you back on the show, because I wanted to ask you, when you were on the show last year to talk about Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, and once again, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry about that.
What? It's the best Star Trek movie. Everybody knows that.
You're the guy that likes it. I forgot about that. I asked you who your space dad was. That is, who's your favorite Star Trek captain? And your answer was Kirk. But if you had a hypothetical list, where would Picard fall on that list?
Oh, Picard would definitely be number two. That is the lovely thing about Star Trek. You have the two-fisted lounge lizard in Kirk, and you have the, thoughtful, orderly man in Picard.
Yeah.
Between the two of them, they're a great person.
Yeah. And I feel people say that they're and the antithesis of each other. I don't think that that's true necessarily, but there's definitely a refinement in Picard that Kirk doesn't always bring to bear, I suppose. If you had a bottom of that list, who would it be?
That would be tough. It's weird. I'm going to say this. And there are plenty of people who disagree with me.
Yeah.
Every time that I've heard Kate Mulgrew in an interview, I've always found her to be pretty obnoxious.
Okay. All right.
And super effective. Now, having said that,
I'm just going to stretch and get up there. Okay, there we go.
Having said that, I've heard plenty of people who say that she is an absolute delight. This is solely going on my impressions of her. As a result, Janeway's kind of toward the bottom. And again, with that said, haven't watched a lot of Voyager, so I could be completely talking out of my rear right now.
That's fair. I obviously really like Janeway, and from the guy in the NX-01 hat, Archer's definitely at the bottom of my list. As far as all the Starfleet captains go, not the best. Nice guy though.
I've literally only seen one episode of Enterprise.
Which
and it
one?
Was the last one. So it's basically
really?
Riker going around saying, "Wow, what a neat ship."
Did you watch it specifically because it was Riker?
Yes, I guess. I'm trying to really remember exactly what my thought process was. It's like, well, I've never really given the show a shot, and Jonathan Frakes is going to be on it, so we'll see how it goes. Maybe I'll start watching it in reruns. It hasn't happened yet.
I suppose. As a comic book guy, I know you'll recognize the scenarios that we're exploring tonight. You know, the idea of a what if or an Elseworlds situation, where some fictional element of the world that we know is different, and then everything's affected, kind of like for want of a nail, the Federation was lost.
Exactly.
As a comic guy, do you have a favorite Elseworlds story from comics?
Okay, I have this fascination with What If, the original Marvel series, and the second Marvel series, and even to an extent the animated series. And that is, I love that the answer to most of the questions, a la like, what if, and, Uncle Ben survived, is everybody would die horribly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. There's rarely a kind of, and things work out just in a slightly different way. Or there's the, like there are three kinds of what ifs, and I don't want to go off on here, but there is the everybody would die horribly.
Yeah.
Things that that don't really make any sense would happen, a la, what if Daredevil killed the Kingpin? Well, then the Hobgoblin would kill Daredevil, and the Rose would become the new Daredevil.
Sense.
I'm like, wait, okay.
Right.
And the third one is the exact same thing would happen, but in a different way. Like, what if the Mafia didn't kill the Punisher? Well, then corrupt cops would kill the Punisher's family.
Yeah.
Then corrupt cops would, and he'd become the Punisher, just more focused on corrupt police officers. It's like, okay,
yeah,
sure.
I have a lot of affection for the old What If series, but most of the answers to those questions, the what if questions, is, well, it wouldn't be as good as the status quo. Like everything would just sort of go back to what it was. So what if Magneto ran the X-Men? Well, they'd be a little different, a little rougher, but they would totally screw everything up. And then, Charles Xavier would just show up and be like, no, I'll run the X-Men. And everything's fine. So, well, let's get into our discussion. To do that, we need to set some ground rules. And as we said before, the effect of Picard just can't be calculated because he spends a lot of his time literally stopping time from exploding or taking down gods. So we need to limit the scope of our talk to a selection of episodes where we'll speculate on the effect on the world of Star Trek if he's not there. And not necessarily that he was never born or like he died when he was stabbed by that Nausicaan, just that he's not there. And somebody else, some less capable captain, is there in his stead. Johnny Starfleet.
Let's call him Riker.
Yeah, well, see, that's the point. Let's make it Johnny Starfleet, because if we don't do that, if Picard is out, then obviously Riker's there. And Riker is also very capable and would definitely have some solution. And then this would just be Captain Riker Week. And this isn't Captain Riker Week. So we'll just have a regular Starfleet captain who is not as adept for whatever reason as Captain Picard.
Captain Phil.
Captain Phil Starfleet. I just want to note in the chat, somebody suggests that if you do want to check out Enterprise more, Joe, you should watch the episodes In a Mirror Darkly, parts 1 and 2, which is a big mirror universe type thing.
Ooh, that is one of my favorite things. One thing I've recently gone into Deep Space Nine, and one thing that delighted me was that they explored the Terran Empire, which was, sadly, and I never understood quite why, but sadly neglected during TNG.
Yeah.
And it's such a great premise. And for me, it's such a great premise. I never understood why it would not be played heavily. I would basically do the Terran Universe television show.
They're kind of, spoiling for that if they ever get Michelle Yeoh to stop winning Oscars and Golden Globes to do a second
Discovery. One of the things I loved about Discovery, when they made that announcement, when they made that reveal, I basically jumped up and down for joy.
Yeah, and you're watching DS9 now, and they go hard in the paint with the Mirror Universe.
Oh yeah, yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about our episodes. And as we go along, I thought that we could examine specifically in this situation or these situations some particular aspects of Picard's character that helps him succeed. Specifically, his sense of morality, and particularly his sense of moral outrage. His empathy, his empathic qualities, his quality of being a supportive leader and a good boss, and also his oratorical ability, his ability to argue things and to speak well. And the first episode we're looking at, focusing on Picard's sense of moral outrage, is the TNG Season 4 episode, The Drumhead.
Yes.
So, a quick summary of the Drumhead. An overzealous Starfleet admiral begins a witch hunt aboard the Enterprise, determined to find a conspiracy, and eventually accuses Picard of treason. And, Picard's not in this in our version, but of course, Picard picks up pretty early that this is a situation that's going south.
Mm-hmm.
You have to wonder how susceptible a And I always wonder, we talk on Enterprising Individuals all the time about like, what is the Federation really like? They seem to be really nice. They're find violence abhorrent. So are they like not inured to like, the worst things in society? Like, would they be taken aback by something? Would they be ready to spot somebody who is trying to be a charismatic leader, who is trying to rule through like force or persuasion? Something that obviously in this century we're very familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
Could an Admiral Satie, without somebody like Picard to reveal her, really like, would we get like a Grand Inquisitor Satie?
Well, that is one of the things I want to say. It's weird that she is an admiral and operates as basically chief investigator for the Federation.
Yeah, it's
like
really
it's just so weird, like ranking that you'd think it would be something else. And well, clearly we are susceptible. Well, the one thing that TNG, Deep Space Nine et al. Does do is, while the Federation has noble goals and ambitions, it is very much a bureaucracy in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you have to like kind of cut through red tape. And I would think what's the word I'm looking for? I would think the sort of authoritarian personality could make their way through that in a very effective and damaging way.
Mm-hmm. I think that's true. I think that this is probably one of the best examples, certainly in TNG, that we see of somebody doing that. I think there's been a couple other times, but nobody, as you said, so like highly positioned within the Federation. Usually it's somebody trying to coup something, or there's a cult planet or something like that. And so it's weird that like she has this power. Of course, it's Gene Simmons, it's a great guest star, but
sadly the Gene Simmons from Kiss.
No, we never got him, unfortunately. Yeah. I think that we would be looking at a Federation consumed by paranoia and fear. And it's something that does get dealt with, I think, in DS9 a lot, as the Dominion War ramps up. Mm-hmm. Something that I'm going to mention now, but will be part of all the episodes that we talk about, is that the Romulans really are everywhere, or at least seem to be everywhere in the middle part of TNG. Under every rock, there's always some plot. They wonder if it's the Romulans. It's kind of this thing that we never really breaks fully in TNG. Of course, we get Nemesis is where we really deal with the Romulans, and we know how that turned out. Do you think that TNG could have or should have just gone into open conflict with the Romulans, or resolved the Romulan problem, dealt with them more directly, or do they work better skulking in the shadows?
They work better as basically a Cold War villain, as opposed to a hot war villain. And I don't think there's a perfect answer to that, and I think, extra textually, we have to look at it as the show had a continuity, but it wasn't like television today, where it's a season-long arc. And I think if you're actually having a hot war where like let's say for argument's sake, every third episode is a battle with the Romulans, you'd either need to resolve it, so it would only be a hot war for like a season and then there's some sort of peace, or it would get repetitive very quickly. So yeah, in closing, I don't know.
Who would win, do you think, circa 2360 something, 60X, where we are in this episode? Who would win in a fight between the Romulans and Starfleet? Because I see like the future that I see is that Satie, gets a giant robot suit and becomes, Grand Inquisitor. And this gets pushed the whole way. Whether or not she wants a war, this kind of paranoia will lead to confrontations that will lead to a war. So who wins?
Well, as a person who believes in truth, nobility, and justice, I would have to say the Federation would conquer in the end.
Of course. But without a leader like Picard to get them there,
here we go.
How are they going to do it? Do you think we see in this episode that, and obviously this is kind of like focused in the episode is set up to give Picard this moment, this like Joseph Welch, have you no decency, ma'am kind of moment. But without him in the world, is there anybody else that we know that stands up and does that instead of him?
Well, before we go there, just really quickly, on Satie, do we think that Satie has corrupted her principles, because it is established within the episode that her father was one of the most respected jurisprudence of of outer space time, which I believe is the technical term.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, do you think it's just sort of that she has fallen into her own legal and bureaucratic kind of like rabbit holes that makes her think that like turning an investigation into an interrogation is the proper way to go about things? Is it that, well, I'm not sure about this guy, but legally I can condemn him?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it leads me to confess that I like this episode. I don't think that it's necessarily well plotted, if not well written, because we never do get a reason, really. We get peeks into her character and the idea that she was, raised by her father in the shadow of her father to be this sort of dogged person. But we never really understand why she's going so hard on this idea of Romulan spies, or just trying to find any kind of conspiracy or something like that. Like if she's trying to make her bones have something to be remembered by before she retires, or if she really is worried about the fear of Romulan infiltration and subterfuge. And so, like, for that reason, I think it would be a little stronger if we felt more that she had a point, but she was going about it the wrong way. But at the end, Picard just kind of destroys her by like using her daddy's words against her, and she just kind of crumbles like a house of cards.
Well,
so I don't really have a good answer
would
for
say,
that.
well, and Picard would say to Worf specifically, like, these are the people we have to watch out for, like implying that her, that she was malevolent all along.
Yeah, and that there's other people possibly like her.
Well, and obviously other people can be malevolent too.
Yeah. One good thing short on time, we have to move on. I wanted to mention that I like how one good piece of writing is how the aide, Sati, and then her aide, a Beta Set aide, go to Worf initially and go, we know you've been discommendated and, we don't trust Klingons, but you're one of the good ones.
Yeah.
And and Worf, and they pull him in, because he gets that validation from them. And then suddenly he's their guy. Like they made him into their guy. And then at the end of the episode, he's like, oh man, why did I do all that? And Picard's like, don't worry about it. It happens to people. Don't worry about it. It can happen to anybody. So, all right. So, Robot Sati, war with the Romulans. I think we have our answer there.
Yep. If no Picard, then obviously she would be like, have the Nixon Futurama battles.
Right. Yes. Just doing this. Let's talk about our next episode. We're looking at the episode from the third season, the episode Sarek. Here is a brief summary of the episode Sarek. Violent emotions sweep the Enterprise when Ambassador Sarek comes aboard to finish a long diplomatic mission.
And this is the first kind of stunt episode by bringing a original series cast member in there.
Yeah, obviously McCoy was in the pilot, but yeah.
But like Spock would come like a season or two later than Scotty and Relics.
Yeah. It's brave of the show to take a slight detour that they didn't feel like they needed to do that. I'm sure that's been said before, but I like the fact that, sure, like half the writing staff is all people that were connected to the original show, but they're like, no, this is its own thing, and we'll mention things once in a while. Speaking
a lesser show would have had a yearly Kirk Picard team up.
Yes. I keep thinking of Battlestar Galactica and like having Apollo.
Why, Richard Hatch? How nice to see you.
Why is Apollo here? Yeah. Speaking of people from other shows, they mentioned at the beginning of the show that Picard met Sarek at his son's wedding.
I know, right?
Yeah, which has left fans speculating about whether that's Spock or Sarek, or Sybok. I think at this point we're pretty sure it's not. So I wonder if they'll maybe square the circle on that in Strange New Worlds with their introduction of Sybok.
Well, having watched Star Trek: The Final Frontier many times this year, I can tell you that Sybok dies at the end. So it probably wasn't his wedding.
That's true. But maybe Picard was a very little boy. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, he was a lieutenant, so he was probably at least an adult.
Maybe he's got like a whole, like, let's have the Sarek bunch. There's like a whole, dun, 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 dun. He's got, a bunch of sons. There's a bunch of daughters. They're all Earth they get together, and that's the thing.
It's fully possible that Picard was a very young man and has confused details. Sarek's son could be like Michael Burnham's grandson. He just doesn't remember, you know, like
he's got, yeah. He's got a
like,
whole
he's a
orphanage
busy
full of
man.
kids.
Yeah.
He's a lot of projects he's working on.
Yeah.
Well, in this episode, there are a couple things about Picard specifically that win the day here. The fact that he has an eye for protocol. I love the fact that the aide comes to him very early on and is like, or actually, does he go to, no, he asks, I think Data on the bridge. He says, how's your captain? Is he good at like talking about treaties and stuff like that? Does he like getting into bubbly hot tubs with aliens? Like, how does that all work? And so he has like that ability to assist like mentally Sarek. Also, he's somebody who can really confront Sarek at the end. He's brave enough to confront this man that he really admires, but also to logically engage with Sarek on his own terms and say, look, you have to deal with this problem. Nobody wants to deal with getting old and not being what we used to be. But if you don't do that, who knows what's going to happen? What would happen?
Well, I mean, I think if it's not Picard, it's not somebody who respects Sarek to the level that Picard does. And that respect comes from also Picard's absolute love and devotion to Earth and Federation history. So you got to figure Captain Phil would be like, that guy's nuts. Screw this treaty. We got things to do.
Yeah, I suppose.
And obviously, you know, Captain Phil's is stock worker.
Yeah, right. Yeah. He's made it all the way to the bridge of the flagship.
But you have to wonder, if you didn't have that reverence for Sarek, would you address him yourself and offer to do a mind meld, or would it just be like, well, I got a report to Starfleet that this guy has like space Alzheimer's? Right.
Yeah, we've blown it. Sorry, 100 years down the drain. We never really know if how important the Lagarans are, although Picard calls it like a very important treaty. I'm really worried about having presumably Sarek is like a superlative telepath. So what happens when he goes full Professor X on everybody due to Bendai syndrome? You know, like, is this something that everybody on the Enterprise goes mad, that goes beyond the Enterprise? We know that the range of telepathy is sort of weird in Star Trek, but in Discovery, Sarek can mind meld or communicate with Burnham across light years. So does this become like a radiating bubble of anger and madness that spreads throughout the Alpha Quadrant?
Well, I have to, as much as we're giving credit to Picard, I have to imagine in order to ascend to a captain's chair, you have to have that minimal deductive abilities to realize, hey, my crew was doing just fine until this crazy Vulcan showed up.
Yeah, I know.
Like, you would have to be able to, like, you could recognize the source of that problem. You would be enough of a diagnostician. Is that the correct pronunciation of that?
Yeah, sure.
To be able to say, like, all right, everything was fine. This guy shows up. Everybody's going nuts.
Yeah. Well, it's an hour-long show, so they've got to let it play out throughout the acts. But yeah.
Sure. But, you know, within a relative amount of time, like, I don't think that, like, I think it takes Picard to address Sarek with reverence and honesty and almost a familial attachment.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, maybe it's that Picard is super attuned to everybody, but I would think that, like, your average captain sitting behind Sarek would say, hey, that Vulcan's crying.
Right.
Yeah. But it would take Picard to also like be able to logically joust with him.
Yeah.
You know, and being able to make Sarek admit, like, I wasn't crying, it was just one tear. I'm like, aha, it was a tear though, you know?
Yeah. That Vulcan has that optical effect that they use instead of glycerin. They get that like fake tear that goes down. They do that in Best of Both Worlds too. Well, at the very least, Wesley and Geordi are wrestling in that hot tub for sure. Like that fight's going to go the whole way.
Oh yeah, no, that fight's going on. I really want to know how Wesley's date went.
Yeah, right. Or if
I assume poorly.
Yeah. Or after Wesley says to Geordi about, I'd have to get my women on the holodeck. You know, Geordi just goes back to the holodeck with all his women and just cries about how
specifically
you understand
that's
me.
Yeah,
Don't you, Robo Bambi?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. There's just 20 of her. It's like he doesn't know what he's talking about, right? Everybody. Yeah. This is I love this
I also
episode.
just a real. I love that fight. Like, there's somewhere in that fight. It's like, well, I get more action from books than you get in real life, and it's like, but Shorty, he's like 16.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, like I'm much more knowledgeable about romantic relationships than you, child. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. This is a conversation that we should be having at work. Yeah.
Mhm.
This is a great episode. I can barely countenance having to take Picard out of it because of Patrick Stewart's performance in it. It's really great, and I feel like just in my own work on Captain Picard week this week and the other shows that I've seen, I feel like there's been so many points where people have said this is really where the show gets good, but this is just another one of those many points where it's like this show is really doing something that like other sci-fi shows haven't done, and there were great performances on TOS, but they were always in that kind of like 60s sort of TV way. But this is just so like a real ass actor is really applying himself to this goofy stuff, and this is really great.
Oh yeah, totally. So so we can agree, if not for Picard, Sarek would have probably ended his illustrious career in kind of disgrace. It'd be like the last 10 years of Stan Lee's life, kind of.
Oh my god. Please, let's not go there.
Yeah, it's the only comparison I could think of because I just read a Stan Lee
Just
biography.
Imagine what would happen. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and then
Next time we talk, by the way, we're having a conversation about Stan Lee's Just Imagine.
Okay, sure. Not here though. God, no.
Yeah, there's a lot to dig into though.
And then they just have to torpedo the Enterprise-D from long range because so they don't have to get close to the Bendai system or syndrome. Let's talk about our next episode, and that is the episode from the third season, Sins of the Father.
That's the one where the father commits sins.
Yeah, he's always sinning, that father.
Yeah.
Here is a synopsis from the episode where Worf is plunged headfirst into the politics of the Klingon Empire when his deceased father is accused of treason. And
okay.
Yes, go ahead.
I really enjoy this episode. Do we need the first 10 minutes of it though? Do we need the whole charade of I'm an exchange officer?
I don't want to be accused of doing the first 10 minutes of this episode week on this show, but we get.
Sorry, I didn't mean to drag it down there.
First of all, we get Tony Todd as Kern. First of all, we get replicated burned bird meat. We get him smearing caviar on his turkey. We get him being
belittling Wesley.
Yeah, well, you get him being mean to everybody, but then being nice to Worf, which is the meanest thing that he can do to Worf. So it does feel kind of like a Simpsons episode where like the first 6 minutes are like, what is all this? And then it settles into, oh no, Homer bought a snowblower or something like that.
And by the way, let us not gloss over. Being mean includes threatening to murder fellow crewmen.
Yes, right, right. Which Troy does not get, and I love that the show doesn't make a big deal out of it because Kern says that, and she's like, "Oh, he's not kidding about that. He's not kidding at all." Yeah. So immediately, Picard hears about this. Oh, you've got a problem on your homeworld, a race that we have often been in conflict with. Set the controls for the Heart of Kronos. We're heading there, and I'm going to help you out. Not many bosses would have done that.
Not any that I've had.
Yeah, and certainly not Captain Phil Starfleet. He's getting nowhere near there. Forget that.
Yeah.
So
seriously, Klingon? I got places to be.
I don't think so. No.
Yeah.
So Picard doesn't exist. Obviously, he does not accompany Worf there. He does not become his Chadich. I think, the field is totally open as to what could possibly happen. Before we talk about it, I want to mention really fast some of the things that Picard does. He immediately speaks up in the chamber as his commanding officer, which is Kempek is really impressed by that. As soon as he gets back to the Enterprise, he's like, give me all the Klingon law books. I need to read up on this stuff. So he's prepared. He stabs a guy. He goes to find the lady who's got the testimony and has to stab a guy to get her to convince her to do it. And then at the end, he stands up with Worf and he's like, no, we're not going to take this. They do take it. Ultimately they did. But yeah, he's a big influence in this, but what does Phil Starfleet do? None of that.
Well, I mean, if it depends upon what kind of person Phil Starfleet is. Let's say he's somebody of average, kind of like morals and a sense of honor. It would probably be like, yeah, The head of the Klingon Council's right, man. Just stay on the ship. Who cares?
I like to think of the captain.
You know what? Your brother can stay here too. We got room.
Right. Yeah. Right. You want to join Starfleet? Yeah.
Yeah.
You could have burned bird meat all the time. I like to think of the captain from, I can't remember the name of the ship. The captain from the beginning of Star Trek 3, when David Marcus is going back to the Genesis
the
planet.
guy who kind of looks like Joe Bologna but isn't.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And as a captain, he's just like, I don't know, to do that. No, I don't want to do that. And then boom, they blow up and they're dead.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two ways that I see this going. Obviously, there's the boring one, which is Worf dies. Kern either dies because he's put to death, or if the Enterprise doesn't accompany Worf to the High Council, then there's no Dr. Crusher to bring Kern back to life after he's stabbed.
That's true.
And then Duras just manipulates the Empire into ... war with the Federation, another 100 years of corruption under the Duras regime, I don't know. Or, without Picard's example that he set for his officer and his mediating voice, Worf just figures it out on his own, and he blabs the whole secret. Like, the second he finds out, he just is like, yes, this is what they're doing. They're trying to cover this up. And then, assuming that he and Kern can escape Kronos, he gathers, like, honorable Klingons to him, and we've got a Klingon civil war going on.
Yeah, no, I was about to say, if this goes screwy, if the kind of like conspiracy is shown to the light, it's very possible that the Klingon Federation alliance completely disintegrates.
Yeah, and you'd have to wonder what the Federation would do as they see the Klingon Empire falling into civil war. In Kirk's time, there were voices, on the council that were like, let them die, right? I wonder,
or now they are at their weakest, and it's time for us to strike.
Right, exactly, yeah. So I wonder what the 24th Century Federation Council, or at least Starfleet, would do if they saw the Klingons sort of falling apart. I mean, we know what they helped out with the Romulans and the Vulcans during unification. Which, by the way, if Picard doesn't, we're not supposed to do other episodes, but if Picard doesn't mind meld with Sarek, he doesn't have that connection to talk to Spock later on when he does unification in later episodes.
This is true. And before we move on to episodes, I just want to say, seeing Tony Todd in this episode made me really appreciate like the kind of like stock players that the Star Trek franchise has had. Because he also, Tony Todd was it Jake Sisko as an old man in that episode of Deep Space Nine, which title I can't remember, but you know what I'm talking about, I assume. Yeah, where he's
Visitor.
The Visitor, where the young writer comes to kind of learn at the knee of Jake Sisko. Which is a really fun episode. But again, I love that, like, you know why, but that like Magil Barrett's always around. It just always makes me just kind of makes me smile.
Yeah, I love the idea that that they just keep bringing back people. Sometimes they bring them back because the prosthetics fit. But they, you get somebody that you like, they enjoyed it, you enjoyed having them, they're really good, and you just bring them back. And then you stick a forehead on them. There's somebody different. Who cares?
Renee Avishar, another perfect choice. Small role in Star Trek 6, plays Odo. Plays Odo in Deep Space Nine. It is a thing that always kind of warms my heart.
Yeah, me too. In the chat, Haven Studio says, we could have easily had the storyline of yesterday's Enterprise if Joe Starfleet was the captain in Sins of Our Fathers. So
Why does he have to be Joe Starfleet now?
Yeah, why can't he be something, it's Joe, Phil, Johnny, come on.
I like Phil. Let's stick with that. It's nowhere near either of our names.
Sorry, chat, it's Phil. Yeah, definitely. Seeing a Federation that has to completely reconfigure for war now that the Klingons are just running wild, which is kind of what happens in Discovery, the first season of Discovery. Let's talk about our next episode, and that episode is focuses on Picard's skills of declamation or his oratorical ability, and that is season 2's episode, The Measure of a Man.
An episode I've never seen. Because
Really?
when I rewatched Next Generation, I took the advice of everybody I knew and skipped the first 2 seasons.
No, yeah,
And
that's
now
why.
seeing the quality of that episode, I realized like I have to go back, watch the
Yeah.
first 2 seasons, and I'm sure there's going to be a couple of lumps in there, but I'm sure there's also going to be a couple of diamonds.
This is another one of those spots, maybe in a more conspicuous space where it's like, no, no, the show is getting good now. It really is. It's probably one of the first great episodes of the show. A quick synopsis: Picard must prove Data is legally a sentient being with rights and freedoms under Federation law when transfer orders demand Data's reassignment for study and disassembly. Picard is, and just a note, like you could easily swap this with the Drumhead in terms of moral outrage and like oratorical ability. This one is a little more calculated because he's approaching it. He's making a formal legal argument. So I think that this fits like oratorical ability more, especially with that amazing speech that he makes at the end in his defense of Data. This is, if you rip
There is, I'm sorry to interrupt you. There is something though that is sort of like, one thing I really loved about this episode is it starts with, I'm defending my friend because I know what's right and wrong, and I know that Data's an individual, and him realizing, through Guinan that no, it's a larger issue. It's treating sentient life form as property.
Yeah.
And that, it's not Data's an android, but he also has what I would call a soul. It's that if you do this now, you're going to be basically subjecting, for lack of a better term, a race of synthetic beings.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Sorry, I really wanted to make sure I threw that in there.
Picard is he's a load-bearing part of all these episodes, but certainly this one, and on both sides of the argument, literally, because he's intimately familiar with Philippa Lavoie, perhaps literally. So is there no grounds for recusal here or like a mistrial? I love at the end of the episode, like she's trying to figure it out. It's a very small, intimate court, but she's like, I don't know if I'm qualified to know this. It's like mistrial right there. All Maddox has to do is just go. This is going to the Supreme Court. The judge literally said she doesn't know what she's talking about. But yeah, like he is familiar with Lavoie. He specifically pulls all the laws at first on transferring officers. He goes to her later before she is adjudicating the case and says, give me some advice as a lawyer. Like, can I get my guy out of this thing? So, yeah, like if you just had Phil or Johnny or Joe Starfleet in this case, somebody with no connection.
We've established it's Phil.
Sorry. Phil, Joe, Johnny. He had a lot of names. If it's a guy who is just like General Captain Man, he would probably, respect his officer, but would he really, go to bat? He wouldn't know that the JAG officer in this case, Data would be in a lot of trouble, I think. And he would be the defense of Data in this case with, I suppose Riker would be in this, with Riker as the prosecutor. Do you think that Riker makes a good case in this trial?
Well, he does, but he's making a very flat case.
Yeah.
It's like, well, here are my facts. You can bend steel. I can disconnect you.
Yeah.
You're not sentient.
Yeah.
And it's true. Those things are true, but but with that, I mean, the one, and I very cautiously use this word. The one flaw with the episode is that you could say, okay, Data, so I'm going to disassemble you. And Data could respond, but no, I'd rather you didn't. Like, what? You have feelings on the matter? Well, I guess you're not a robot.
Yeah. And and then a little grace note at the end, the Pinocchio thing, which I don't know if that really applies at all.
Flashback to the pilot.
They don't have Disney movies in the future because the whole point of Pinocchio is that he became a real boy, or was accepted as a real boy. But okay, yeah, that works, I guess. I think Data would be screwed. I don't think that. I think that probably he would just be summarily ruled against, like she threatens to do. Because I could imagine, Captain Phil just being like, well, I'm just going to stand, on my authority as captain. I have authority over my officers. And then she just rules, and then there's nothing they can do. Try to fight it, maybe. Maybe Data flees. What happens if Data takes his little...
what happens if he builds a giant robot suit?
Yeah, right, yeah. That's the next act. But what if he takes his little hexagon suitcase and he gets in a shuttlecraft and just takes off?
Yeah, how much money does the Federation spend chasing him down? Can you just...
Ooh, an android hunt. That's the next episode, yeah.
which is pretty much, I guess, the plot of Insurrection.
The first part
At
of it,
least
yeah,
the first part of it, yeah.
yeah.
Well, there's also the question. Let's say that Phil Starfleet is every bit as good a litigator as Picard,
Okay.
but Philippa isn't attracted to him. How does that change the dynamic?
Okay, sure.
Yeah, like there has to, there is that tension there, or there is that tension there that does sort of like, inform how they act to one another.
Yeah.
And with that is Phil Starfleet, was he also nearly court-martialed by Philippa, or is this like unique to Picard? Because if not, so if not, like there isn't a secret past going into it.
Yeah.
Which also, by the way, is a reason for a mistrial.
Oh no, this is totally 100% a mistrial.
And I guess they kind of like put band-aids on it by saying like, oh, we're the only law out here, man. It's us or nothing,
And Star Trek definitely did this in TOS. It does it some in TNG, and then they kind of just their world becomes, I think, more like our world. But they talk about how it's like, we don't want to say frontier justice, but like when you're in the middle of nowhere, it's sort of like these are the rules, and so a lot of things are sort of adjudicated or solved that way. They are a moving frontier fortress. They are representing the Federation in the darkness, and so I can see that. It's just weird for them to go, it's important that we have a JAG office on this new starbase on the edge of the neutral zone or whatever it is, but we're just going to send like 2 people, like one lady and then her legal aid, I guess. So,
yeah. I kind of assumed that they were going to send more people in the future. This is just an early setup.
Yeah. They didn't know that like Data was going to pull in right then, and then Maddox would be there to have one of the biggest cases in Federation history. Speaking of which, if we go forward to the future, and they already have on the series, this apparently happened after the events of Nemesis and Data's death. They apparently went ahead and made Data-ish robots. I don't know how far or how deeply we get into the sentience of the robots that we see on Mars in Star Trek Picard, but they went ahead and did it.
They built Data-ish robots that have more lines around their eyes and are a little bit puffier.
Yeah. And so I don't know what
they couldn't quite get the hairline right for some reason.
Yeah. I don't really know what that means. I don't know. That gets into a lot of questions about like, how does manual labor work in the Federation? If people just work because they want to and because they're good at it. Maybe there's guys that are ditch diggers that are like, I just love digging ditches. My brother Phil, he's a Starfleet captain, but no, ditches for me. So they apparently
every day
decided,
I just see a job well done. There's my ditch.
Yeah, I never work a day in my life. Apparently they decided that they needed like data robots to do whatever this dangerous work is on Mars. But the data robots can be controlled or can be inspired to riot. So this did kind of happen despite Picard's efforts in this episode.
Yes. So what we're saying is Picard was a failure.
Maybe he did fail. Or maybe the lesson was learned by everybody in that room, but wasn't learned
by and large. Or the New Deal worked great until until the early 1980s when all of its programs were shut down.
Yeah. Civilizations, they go through peaks and valleys, don't they? Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, those are the 4 qualities of Picard that we wanted to talk about. But there's one more episode that I wanted to talk about. And
what?
This is kind of a wild card pick. And the reason that I want to talk about this is because we're taking Picard out of episodes, but since we're doing what ifs, I thought it'd be fun to put Picard into an episode that he was taken out of and speculate how that he would use all of his skills to change the outcome. And that episode is a pair of episodes, the classic TNG episodes, The Best of Both Worlds, parts 1 and 2. And the synopsis of part 1, and it's the only one that really matters for our purposes here, is the Borg begin an invasion of Federation space much sooner than was expected. With the Enterprise unable to affect them, the Borg capture Captain Picard and turn him into one of their own. But in this case, no, they don't. Worf's able to get over that railing just a little bit quicker and snap the neck of the Borg that's going to kidnap him. So Picard is available for the confrontation with the Borg. How is it different?
Well, let's see. The Borg would not have intimate knowledge of Starfleet regulations, strategies, etc.
Yeah.
Would theoretically not have knowledge of the Enterprise capacity, but I can't remember if that was already established, if they already obtained that in the first Borg episode, when they're just getting aboard and going through the computers.
Yeah, I think they knew just about everything there was to know about the Enterprise,
Okay.
at least. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the good guys have Picard. The bad guys don't have his knowledge of Starfleet, but the good guys don't have their hacking
Knowledge of the
backdoor.
Borg. Yeah.
Yeah, they can't hack the Borg that way. Thinking about the plan that they've got going into the confrontation before Picard is stolen away, you've got the fleet, amassing at Wharf 359 as a fallback, and they're going to use this deflector weapon. So theoretically, without Picard's knowledge, the deflector weapon would have an effect. Would it have the totality of the effect that Geordi was thinking it would have? Would it be very devastating? Would it destroy that Borg cube and some of the Enterprises they pointed out? Or would it not work at all? Like, what do you think would happen?
Well, one thing I wasn't quite clear when watching the episode, and I couldn't tell if it was a kind of backsliding on the writing, is would the Enterprise at any point was the Enterprise going to sacrifice itself? Because it kind of seemed to me that the big deflector thing would destroy the Enterprise, and other times it seemed like no, it's just a couple of decks would be ruined.
They do say, when they first pitch the idea, they say it would basically blow up the ship, and then
right. Okay, so I'm not wrong there.
Yeah, and then I think later they refine it to the point where they say the front half of the engineering section would have to be evacuated. It would definitely mess up the ship.
But the majority of the crew would survive.
Yeah,
theoretically.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. I mean, the question is, without Locutus, what it would completely be man's wit versus the Borg's supreme knowledge, and quasi invincibility.
Yeah.
And my temptation, my knee-jerk reaction is to give it to Picard for figuring out a solution or being able to get the most out of his crew. The one sort of caveat to that is how distracted is he going to be by having two officers competing to be number one?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. They end up throwing the entire thing because Riker and Shelby can't agree. Yeah. Do you think that, obviously the Borg make it past the Enterprise because she's wounded, and they make it to to Wolf 359 and just devastate 38 ships. Would that have happened if they had not had the advanced knowledge that they got from Picard and his knowledge of strategy as well? Could 38 ships have taken out a Borg cube?
No.
You don't think so?
Well, I mean, for the episode, I mean, it's a good question because you have to the way the Borg can assimilate, the way the Borg is quasi predictive when it comes to pattern recognition, suggests that they would always be able to deflect the Federation weapons. On the other hand, is there a kind of breaking point where it's just sort of like the Borg's, the Borg's ability to deflect is ultimately going to be ruined because, you can, fight one guy, you can't fight an army. And I mean, that's is at some point the sheer power of the Federation better that, more powerful than the Borg cube? And that is the question I'm throwing to you. What do you think?
I don't know. And I think that the reason that we don't know is because none of this is real. Sorry, spoilers, everybody. But what I mean by that is that it's all, additive writing. And so if somebody writes that one Borg cube takes out 38 ships, then it becomes, for future writers, a Borg cube took out 38 ships. They're not thinking necessarily that it's because it had the command codes, like it turned all their shields off or something like that. It had some inside knowledge. But I think that Borg cube ships should be formidable. It's just I don't feel like one has ever done this much damage on its own ever again until First Contact, where one makes it all the way to Earth on kind of a suicide mission because all they really wanted to do was travel back through time. And so Picard can show up and go, shoot this place, these coordinates right there, and then that like blows up the Borg ship. So yeah, I don't know. I've always felt like the Borg's ability to adapt is cool, but it's really convenient for them, and it's a way to add tension. Obviously, our cool guns don't work; they always work on other people. And like, can't you like? Sure, they can adapt to your frequency, but what if you turn it up to like 20 or something like that? Like, can it adapt to? Can it get hit from three sides? You know, can it? Like you said, like if 38 ships all shoot at different frequencies, like it can't just have a rainbow shield of protection, you know, to block all the guys.
And one could say even if they're shooting at the same frequency, how strong are those shields if 38 ships are firing at them?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, probably they could stop it. And at this point, I'm trying to remember. I mean, this is the one big like incursion towards Earth that they make, I guess, in this series. If they did stop it here, would that mean that the Borg would send more cubes? Like we just didn't send enough last time, or will they get a similar message that like, okay, we're going to have to think of something else to beat these guys because they think differently than people that we fought before? You know, I don't really know. Did you watch this as a kid? This episode?
Yes, I did. I definitely. I can't. You know, I guess wouldn't it debut 1990, 1991,
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember if I saw both parts of it or if I just saw the second part when it debuted. But like I knew the episode. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you think that Captain Picard was like maybe not coming back?
No, that did not occur to me, and I think that was partially because like I was very scattered when I watched Next Generation. You know, just it's debuting when it's debuting when I'm in high school.
Yeah.
I didn't really dig the first two seasons, or I didn't really dig the first bunch of episodes I saw. Like I'm just very, very, very aesthetically attached to original Trek, and like kind of all the beiges and muted colors didn't appeal to me.
Yeah.
So like I know, I mean, like, but I did still watch it from time to time. It was on Saturday at 6 p.m. Yeah, so I know I definitely watched the second part. I can't remember if I watched the first part when it debuted. Not the greatest answer, but there you have it.
No, it's comprehensive. I feel like
long-winded.
I really did think that because I didn't. I mean, now Patrick Stewart is Patrick Stewart, but like,
but I didn't even answer your question. Yeah, I didn't even really answer your question. I'm sorry, I got lost in my own thought. No, I didn't think he died because it's still Star Trek starring Patrick Stewart.
Yeah, I suppose.
Like, I was cynical enough by that point.
That didn't mean anything to me, and I think like them killing. Tasha Yar in the first season, it's not like a show where anybody can die, but I think I did kind of get the message that like, oh, maybe this is be a real thing. So I think that ultimately the question we're supposed to be asking is, could Captain Picard have solved this? And I think the answer is probably yes, if their original plan works, like if the weapon that they want to use works. Does it complicate things that the Borg's plan themselves is to get a hold of Picard? And so they continue to pursue Picard. Like he could help the fleet defeat the Borg cube, but does Picard make it out of the episode himself? Or does he have to fight to the last?
And that is a very good what if question.
That's true. That's true.
And I would imagine if getting the consciousness of Picard is a top priority to the Borg, enough so that they don't just make one attempt, that they make multiple attempts. Could it not be surmised that the Borg cube would just be chasing the Enterprise around, right, which could allow the Federation Armada to kind of catch up with the Borg cube and end up kind of killing it from behind?
Just use Picard to just kite the Borg cube around until they can pull them past all the ships. Yeah, that's a good strategy. That or maybe they learn about this Phil Starfleet guy and they're go check him out. Yeah. I just wanted to point out in the chat, people are commenting on the effects of this episode and if things change. And obviously this episode is a huge nexus point, if you will, of the Star Trek universe. Jennifer Sisko, Haven Studio says, if Jennifer Sisko, what happens if she would have lived? Because, of course, if everybody doesn't die at Wharf 359, then do we get DS9? Do we get Sisko going to DS9? Is a great point. Also, if Picard hadn't been assimilated, the Enterprise-E wouldn't have known where to attack the cube in First Contact. So maybe the cube in First Contact does a lot more damage to Earth, and they take care of. They go back in time and take over Earth, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
And
then Zefram Cochrane will never be able to play Roy Orbison songs to Vulcans.
That's right. He'll just be playing it to himself in a bomb shelter, drinking.
Or to Alfred Woolward. You never know.
That's true. Yeah, drinking the good stuff. I think that is just about it for our show, and we're at the end of our time. So I want to thank Joe for joining me to talk about Captain Picard. And ABCDTOS is Joe's Star Trek podcast. It's available on your listening platform of choice and at ABCDTOS on Twitter. And you guys are talking about the movies currently, right? What's up next?
Yeah, we are. We are going to be, knock on wood, recording Voyage Home this week.
Great.
And, after we record it, figure it'll be up for streaming in a few days.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. I've enjoyed your coverage of the films, but I'm assuming that that's probably a favorite of everybody on the show. Anybody on the show hate that one?
No, I think, we haven't discussed, we're going to record it this week, so we haven't discussed it yet.
Yeah.
I think I'm the kind of closest to hating it, and it's not because I think it's bad. It's because it was the only Star Trek VHS I had for a long time. So it was just, so I got super sick of it after a while. I don't know why I didn't just go to a store with $15 and buy Khan, but I didn't,
Sure, right, yeah. All the mistakes of our youth, yes.
Yes, exactly.
Thanks again for joining me, and I want to say to everybody,
thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to Strange New Pod for organizing this entire thing and having us on. And everybody stick around, because at 9:30 Eastern Time, right here on YouTube, the Green Shirt Podcast is coming on to Enter the Blunder Dome, talking about some of Picard's greatest mistakes. So join us here, or join them at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And that's it for the show. You can find Enterprising Individuals at enterprisingindividuals.com or at EISTPOD on Twitter. We are part of the Just Enough Trope Podcast Network, and you can find all of our shows, including my other Star Trek podcast, a show called BackTrekking, and our Discoverage live shows by going to Linktree, linktr.ee/Just Enough Trope. And stick around for the green shirts. Have a great week, and that's it from us. Hailing frequencies closed.
Thanks, everybody.